Imagine a world where a single word could dismantle your identity, erase your legal rights, and condemn you to a fate worse than death. In Viking society, that word existed, so potent, so venomous, that being branded with it could unravel your entire life. Manhood wasn't just expected in this culture. It was the axis upon which everything turned. It defined your standing, your rights, even your connection to the divine. To be called unmanly, or worse, morally deviant, wasn't just an insult. It was a formal accusation, one with legal weight and lethal consequences. This label implied weakness, cowardice, and any behavior seen as a betrayal of Viking masculinity. That included adopting passive roles in same-sex relationships or practicing certain kinds of sorcery, rituals often associated with women, and therefore considered deeply shameful for men. Even the god Odin, according to old legends, was not above reproach. His use of forbidden magic drew harsh judgment. It was said that no man could engage in such acts without losing his honor. When identity becomes weaponized, when language itself can ruin a life, it tells you everything about the brutality of a society's values. If this kind of history fascinates you, go ahead and like the video, and consider subscribing for more stories that uncover the darker sides of the past. This accusation wasn't something you could ignore. It had legal standing. A man who was called unmanly had to respond with violence. He was expected to challenge the accuser to a formal duel. If he refused, it was seen as an admission of guilt, and that led to the harshest punishment in Viking law: total exile. But exile didn't just mean leaving town. It meant losing your status as a person. You were stripped of all legal protection. Anyone could kill you without consequence. Worse still, your disgrace could spread like a disease. Families would distance themselves from accused men, terrified that their shame might infect the bloodline. These men weren't just seen as dishonorable. They were seen as contaminated, broken in spirit, unworthy of the warrior society they had been born into. Being called unmanly wasn't just a mark of shame. It was social death. And then came the most final punishment of all. In Viking law, there was a sentence that meant complete erasure: banishment into the wilderness. But this wasn't romantic exile. It was a calculated form of execution. A man condemned in this way lost everything: his rights, his home, his name. Cast into the forests, he was left to survive alone or die alone. Either way, the world he came from would forget him. There were two types of outlawry. The lesser one allowed for eventual return, if the man survived 3 years without committing another crime. But the greater sentence was permanent. No coming back. No redemption. A man under this sentence had to leave all human settlements and was forbidden to accept help, even from his own family. He couldn't seek food, shelter, or protection. He was cut off from homes, from markets, from temples and community gatherings. If he stepped back into society, anyone could kill him. And not only would they face no punishment, they might even be praised. His very name became a curse. He was barred from festivals, denied access to rituals, and excluded from the sacred traditions of his people. He was no longer seen as a man of honor, but as something else, something beneath memory. The old sagas still whisper of such punishments. One of them tells the story of a warrior who lived alone in the wild for years. His body failed slowly. His mind began to fracture. His soul faded into nothing. This was what happened to those who didn't, or couldn't, defend their honor. Not just death, but slow unraveling. isolation, oblivion. Few ever survived long in this state. The Viking world was cruel. Thick forests, freezing winters, and prowling beasts made survival nearly impossible. But even worse than hunger or cold was the silence. No one would sing for these men. No burial rites would be performed. Their deaths were not marked. Their lives were erased. To be a man in Viking society was to carry the burden of strength, violence, and reputation. And for those who failed to meet the standard, those called unmanly, the result was simple. They were hunted, stripped of humanity, treated not as men, but as prey. These men weren't imprisoned. They weren't tried, corrected, or forgiven. They were cast out, stripped of all rights, and declared beyond the reach of law or protection. No one owed them mercy. No one was punished for harming them. In fact, harming them was encouraged. Their lives became open targets, not because of what they did, but because of what they were said to be. The punishment wasn't just legal, it was ceremonial. Cold, systematic. It wasn't enough to cast them out. Their very manhood had to be dismantled in public, piece by piece. Once marked as unmanly, a man lost the right to home, to kin, to legacy. He was no longer spoken of as human, but as a beast in the woods, a nameless, ownerless creature. Killing him wasn't murder. It was a civic duty. And sometimes, it was even rewarded. The one who took his life could legally claim his property, with no blood debt owed. The laws stated it plainly. No restitution was required for killing such a man. But that wasn't the worst part. The deeper punishment was moral. His so-called deviance, whether it was sorcery, sexual behavior that defied masculine norms, or anything that challenged the rigid structure of gender, was seen as contagious, dangerous, not something to punish, but something to erase. In the Viking worldview, identity wasn't a personal matter. It belonged to the bloodline. A man's worth was measured not just by his deeds, but by the honor of those he descended from, and those who came after. To be labeled unmanly didn't just shatter reputation. It cut a man out of his own lineage. For the ones who carried that stain, death was only the beginning. What followed was the silence. These men were never spoken of again, not as warriors, not as sons, not even as failures. Unlike the honored dead, whose names lived on in stone and song, the dishonored were deliberately forgotten, not by neglect, by intent. In Viking culture, to remember someone was to preserve them. Family pride was built on generations of heroes, oaths, and ancestral ties. But if a man had been accused of violating the masculine code and failed to defend himself, his name would quietly disappear from the family tree, as if he had never been born. Historical records reflect this practice. In family sagas and genealogies, the lines of such men are often left blank or broken. This wasn't just shame, it was strategy. To be descended from someone disgraced could poison your bloodline. It could ruin marriages, cost you land, even affect your standing in the assembly. And so, to protect their futures, families did the unthinkable. They cut the man out, first in conversation, then in memory, eventually in history itself. He became a ghost, unspoken, unmourned, and unseen. He may have once fought alongside warriors, sworn oaths by firelight, spilled blood for his kin. But in the end, he was no one. His story was erased, not by time, but by choice. The Vikings weren't merely punishing individual men. They were preserving an idea. a rigid ideal of what a man was supposed to be, and anyone who strayed too far from that vision was cast into oblivion. That same impulse still echoes today. We may no longer use axes and exile, but we still decide who is worthy of protection and who is not. We still write people out of memory. So, what parts of our world reflect that same old fear of the unmanly? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember what the old wisdom says. Cattle die and kinsmen die, and so must one die oneself. But a noble name will never die if one earns it with honor.